Today, what we have the story of Mary and Martha there in Bethany, that Jesus comes to her house. Martha is the one who is doing the serving, doing the hospitality. Mary is sitting at the feet of Jesus. Martha is upset, says, make Mary help me. And Jesus says that Mary has chosen the better part and will not be taken from her. One of the things that I'll use for today's reflection is really from Robert Barron, Bishop Robert Barron, who has a very good, very succinct version of the gospel today. One of the things that he says about this particular gospel that's true is that it always kind of upsets some people that Martha is the one who seems to be given her comeuppance, that she's the one who's kind of brought down, but Mary was exalted before Jesus. So what would happen if everybody was a Mary? Then nothing would happen in this world. Everything would go to you-know-what in a handbasket. And I think that I can relate to that, being in a diocesan priesthood, not being in a religious order that's contemplative. I have a certain affinity for Martha rather than Mary. But let's take a look at, there are three things that Bishop Barron talks about that are important. So let's try to go through those. One is the one essential thing that Martha was thinking that somehow hospitality was important, and it certainly is important at the time in the Middle East at that time, and even to today. Hospitality and giving hospitality for your guest is an important thing. But at that time, the one essential thing was to be there listening to Jesus. So Bishop Barron says it's not just a matter of saying, well, the contemplative life is the important part and the active life is the unimportant part. But what it really is thinking about what is the one essential thing. And for Mary, she was there listening to Jesus. That was the one essential thing. The other thing that he talks about is listening before acting, that in order to act, in order to be effective in our action, we need to listen. And he gives the example of the prophet Nathan and King David. When King David saw that he was living in a house of cedar, but for hundreds of years, the Lord had been there in the tent. So he was there in the tent of meeting, going through the desert, and then even entering into the promised land. He was there in the tent, first in the high places, then finally in Jerusalem, but still in the tent. And so he's like, we need to build a temple fitting for the Lord. Nathan said, fine, that's great, and then thought about it, prayed, and then the Lord came to Nathan and said, no, it's not going to be King David. He's shed too much blood, but it will be his son who will establish the temple. So in a way, perfected by Jesus, but in a way, prefigured, if you will, by King Solomon, who was David's son. David made all the preparations for him. He got the wood, he got the gold, he got the bronze, the silver, all the things needed in materials to build the temple, but it was his son who built the temple. So listening before action. There's a priest in the Archdiocese of Washington who makes a good point. He says, a lot of times people want you to bless this or bless that. He said, I'd rather see what God is blessing and then go join that. So that's a great line too. The other thing is a question of discipleship, putting ourselves in the mind of Martha. Was it that, that Lord, hospitality is the best thing, so therefore she's not helping me, so she needs to be helping me because hospitality is the most important thing? Was Martha thinking, Lord, have her help me because two hands are better than one, and we could both be there at your feet if she was be able to help me? Or is it, as Bishop Barron says, that, and talking about N.T. Wright, who's an Anglican bishop, theologian, and he says that Mary is really taking the place of a man. So Martha is upset that she's in the man's position because the woman's position at that time in ancient Israel was to do all the work, to do the housekeeping, to do the food preparation, to do all of the hospitality, while the man would be sitting at the feet of the rabbi, listening to him, being instructed by the rabbi. So is it that Martha was upset that she was taking the man's position? And one of the things we think about with Jesus is that really it is the great reversal. You see that in the Gospel of Luke, that those who were of great positions of power, authority, who had great money and wealth and fame, that those would be the last, but yet the humble, the poor in spirit, would be the ones who would be first. So that great reversal of the traditional order of humanity, thinking about the great and the powerful and the rich and the famous, but it's not going to be them who will enter first into the kingdom of heaven, but the humble, the Simeons, the Annas of the world, who will be the ones who will go forth. We also think about in the disciples that Jesus had. He certainly had the 12 apostles, but he also had many other disciples, and among them were women. And again, talking to women, interacting with women was much more something that was more of a taboo back at the time of Jesus than we think about today. But again, Jesus was willing to make disciples of all, not just the religious leaders, but to all. He offered that discipleship. And so it really, in this gospel, it really allows us to think and to enter into that place. Was Martha concerned simply about hospitality? Was she thinking the two hands would be more than one and that she could join Mary? Was she upset that Mary was taking the place of the man? All these things we can think about. We can enter into prayer. We can enter into contemplation in this scene and put ourselves in this scene and ask the Lord for that blessing of really deepening our desire for listening to the Lord and listening to him speak in our lives. Thanks. God bless.